Difficult Realities is an Elite City Media podcast. If you're interested in more information, make sure you follow us on Twitter at DifficultPod. Subscribe to our official YouTube channel, and keep your eyes open wherever you listen to podcasts for more episodes. No matter what you're listening on, make sure you turn on notifications so you always know when a new episode is posted. And most importantly, remember that while this is an opinion-based podcast, it is also backed up by evidence and facts. Or in other words, this podcast is Difficult Realities. Oh, hello again. Welcome back to Difficult Realities. If you've made it this far, you must be a real ride or die with us over here at Difficult Realities, because if we haven't alienated you yet, I'm sure it's coming. My name is Swerve, joining alongside, as always, to my left is the wonderful Spittin'.
What's up, guys?
And to my right, the massive Yeti. Oh no, the massive Yeti, where is he?
I'm here.
There he is. He is there.
Hates me.
Yes, and he might have some technical issues today, so we're going to be trying to work around, I don't want to say around him, but we're going to be trying to work around those issues with him today. And what about today? What are we talking about today? Well, one of the most topical situations of the COVID era of the United States, and that would be wages, labor, and exploitation, as well as I do plan on dipping a little bit into corporate welfare, probably towards the end, because I find it to be a directly relative issue to what we're talking about today. But we wanted to spend some time talking about wages and how employees are mistreated by employers and this romanticism of corporations and CEOs in a capitalist culture, man. So if you want to get with Difficult Realities, you can do that in a number of places. We're available just about anywhere you listen to podcasts. I am still waiting to hear back from Pandora, which has been 2 weeks now, so who the hell knows what Pandora's on about. But iHeartRadio, Amazon, Podbean, Google, Spotify, YouTube, just about any of those and a few others. You can get them just about anywhere. We are up to 5 full and 1 mini pod as of this point. And we have some interesting things coming in the very, very near future. I don't want to say anything yet because it's not confirmed, but we might have some very interesting people on their way to visit us soon. So with that being said, minimum wage is a topic that we tweeted about just yesterday. I, from the podcast Twitter at DifficultPod, sent out a poll around this time yesterday saying, what do you believe minimum wage should be? We had over 1,300 votes on that, which isn't a huge sample size, but it's a pretty damn good one all the same, given our small standing at the current moment, I would say. 86% of you out there voted that it should be $20 or higher, and the discussions in the comments very much echoed that, from people discussing UBI, to people discussing cost of living, to people discussing market values and inflation, and we had people from all over the world actually contributing to that conversation, which is interesting because it is more of a U.S. issue from our framework than it is a worldly issue, because a lot of other countries have figured this shit out, whereas we have not. About 9% of the people said that it should be around $15 an hour, which is what you kind of hear from the sort of Twitter left as their goal, but apparently a lot of people rightfully think it should be higher than that. 7.7% of people said the current minimum wage is $7.25, and I happen to think I know who it was specifically that voted for that, because they are not a U.S. citizen and they don't totally get our market, but that's fine. And 3% of the people said no minimum wage laws should be in existence. And I know the immediate jump out of that is this idea that, well, they're advocating for slavery, and you know, they want to go, it's probably some like hyper conservatives that jumped in there and are talking about, you know, making people work for free. But the real truth of it, if you go into our comment thread, is that a lot of the people who voted for no minimum wage laws are arguing for a system where wages are sort of irrelevant because of UBI or because of structural reform, and they're more looking for a society where how much you're paid is the least important part of what it is that you do. So I just wanted to clear that up before anybody took a look at that poll after this podcast airs and was like, who the hell just voted for slavery on this leftist poll? You know what I mean? But there is an aspect of slavery to this, and I don't want to talk about prison labor today because we will be doing that quite heftily, and I am prepared to announce that when we get to 13 episodes, our 13th episode, we'll specifically be talking about the prison industrial complex, and there's a reason why it's that episode. I'm sure a lot of you out there who are wise and clever can figure it out pretty quickly, but if not, just hold tight. We got a few episodes before we get there. But what I did want to talk about a little bit today, in addition to minimum wage, is the concept of wage slavery, and we will get into that in just a little bit. But I want to go to the two of you, and Yeti is going to have an interesting perspective on this because he has a totally different government and a totally different wage situation up there in Canada. So we'll start with Spittin', and we'll get to Yeti in just a minute. Spittin', I want your thoughts on the United States minimum wage in its current state.
Okay. The minimum wage, people that say, a minimum wage was never meant to be a living wage.
That's false.
Well, and it is, because that was what the workers fought for back then, was to get a guaranteed minimum wage. Now, this was back when Carnegie and Rockefeller and all them were working people literally to death. There was no minimum wage. There was no hourly. You could work 16-hour days and it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. So these people, these workers, they fought for that, and then they ended up fighting for the 8-hour workday. A lot of stuff we take for granted today. And so, but when people do come and argue with me that a minimum wage was not meant to be a living wage, I will agree to some extent that after World War II, there was the idea of American exceptionalism. And, if you worked hard, you were rewarded with being in the middle class. That was just the way it was.
If you were white, anyway.
Well, okay, yes, and I'm sorry about that. But they took that away from you.
Yes.
At some point in time, and I want to say that it was around 1978 is when we can pretty much pinpoint it.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the framework of it even began before that. The framework of it began under Nixon, because he had a whole bunch of policies specifically designed to start to chip away at regulations and financial organizations that were trying to protect consumer rights. And then, like you said, in the 70s, it started to take off. But another place that it really began to take off, and the place that we are still feeling it to this day, would be under Ronald Reagan and his invention or introduction of trickle-down economics.
Yeah, exactly. And
and Spittin', you were saying earlier that, like, back then they were working so many hours. This seems to have made a bit of a comeback in, like, the Frito-Lay factory and a couple other factories where people are literally walking outside and dropping dead.
Yeah, and not even just walking outside. There was a case with a warehouse that was contracted by Verizon Wireless, the cell phone provider, where a woman actually died on the floor of the factory, and they ordered the workers to keep working while they moved her body. Now, legally, they will say that that's not what happened, and that they sent everybody home after the woman died and offered people the time off and whatnot. But it doesn't match with people's social media presence at the time, where people were tweeting and Facebook posting that, this woman died and they're still making us work around her body. So this is
disgusting.
Yeah, that's like, and we don't even need to begin to talk about Amazon. Everybody already knows how Amazon treats their employees, to the point where supervisors at those Amazon warehouses are actually terminated if they don't terminate enough people within a specific window of time. So turnover is actually a mandatory incentive for supervisors at Amazon.
That's just, I don't know the word I'm thinking of, but you're just pitting other people against each other. You're
Well,
just
that would be
coming
wage
back to
warfare.
you're coming back to like the gladiator days where it's just every man, woman, and child for themselves.
Well,
Now-
and also it's like you're saying, when you have somebody that is willing to work themselves to death, you know, and then the guy next to him isn't, because he's fucking smart and doesn't really, you know, and doesn't want to die because of making sure somebody gets their package in a day. Like,
Mhm.
there you have this this balance where, okay, so we can let that guy go because he's not willing to kill himself, but this guy is. So, you know, just ride him until he dies, and then
And then
just keep
replace him
finding
anyway.
people that fit his mold as opposed to the other guy. And you know, some people would argue, well, you know, that's rewarding laziness if you just keep that guy on. But
Mhm.
if anybody's ever worked a job like that, there's no
There's no
being
laziness.
lazy there.
Yeah. If,
No,
if-
man, those
if-
people were crazy.
if your job situation is such that taking a bathroom break once a day can get you so far behind that you will lose your job, then there is no laziness if you
Yes.
still have that job. Now, we'll get into a little bit of that laziness argument, because I think that's a conservative farce for the most part. But I want to backtrack just a little bit to this idea that
Yes, I do too. I do too.
yeah, that minimum wage was never intended to be a living wage, because there are some quotes from some previous administrations which would suggest the opposite. And I want to bring those to light and allow that discussion. But I also want to give Yeti a chance to give his thoughts in just a second. But I have quotes here from both Roosevelt presidents, which that sounds weirder to say than it really is. But the first one is from FDR. And people know this quote. This quote circulates a lot, and it's, "No business which depends for existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. By living wages, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean the wages of decent living." That one's from FDR. And then I also have one from Theodore Roosevelt, which is, "No man can be a good citizen unless he has a wage more than sufficient to cover the bare cost of living, and hours of labor short enough to, so after his day's work is done, he will have the time and energy to bear his share in the management of the community, to help carrying the general load." So it sounds to me like the origins of minimum wage were both supposed to be to live and to function outside of work and be profitable from it, or at the bare minimum, keep your head above water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But that, somewhere along the line, you know, that was lost because of wage growth.
Yes.
Okay. And like I was saying before, after World War II, you know, like, just the idea of, if you want to go to work as soon as you get out of school, there's a job for you, and
Yeah.
and manufacturing or whatever, and it's going to provide you with enough money to where you can afford a house, and you're going to get some vacation, and you're going to get some retirement, and you're going to get all these things, a raise every year, and without asking for it, without groveling like you have to do today. And
Yeah.
and so everybody just got used to that being the norm. So by the time, you know, that I was going to work in 95 or whatever for my first job, it was at Dairy Queen.
Mhm.
And I think I was making $5 an hour, somewhere around there. And yeah, so that wasn't supposed to be, nobody goes into that thinking that's going to be my career. That was a high school job that I took so I could buy some CDs or whatever. you know, and that was, to me, that was what a minimum wage job was. And it was that way. Like, you took a minimum wage job until you got something better. But the free trade deals took away that something better. I come from a small town where all we had in that town growing up was like a boat factory and a coal mine. And, if you didn't have the means or the smarts to get out of town after you got out of high school, then you went to work at one of those two. And those jobs provided for the whole community. We had a hospital that was UNWA hospital, part of the coal mine. The stores, you could go in and you go into a grocery store and fill your card up, and then you didn't pay them money. They wrote it down on a little card. They handed it to somebody, a supervisor at the coal mine, and that was just taken out of your check. It was a community. And then when I was in high school, the coal mine closed down. And I'm not against that. I'm not, I'm all for, I know that fossil fuels are killing us and all that. But it made this town just shrivel up and die. And then all those people that had been working at the boat factory, NAFTA came in and made it to where that boat factory could move to Mexico or wherever it went. And then so it was gone. And then people had to travel a little bit further to work at Maytag or whatever. And then they moved away because of the free trade. And now all of a sudden, these people that were used to making $20 an hour or whatever, with good benefits and being able to provide for their families, now all of a sudden, there's nothing left. In my town, all that's left is fast food restaurants, gas stations, churches, and banks. And the churches and the banks are for the older people, and the more older people that die, the more banks and churches are closing.
Yeah, because young people are going to switch currencies and everything.
Yeah. And the only reason that the gas stations and the fast food restaurants are open is because our town has an exit right off the interstate. So if you travel, 8 miles east or west to another town, they're not so fortunate. They're in the same boat, except they don't have the fast food restaurants and the gas stations,
Right.
So what's happened is, okay, when I was growing up, maybe a minimum wage job wasn't supposed to be a career, wasn't supposed to be a living wage. At least the idea had gone away from that. But now, the only jobs that are available, like when they get on and they say there's 12 million jobs available, 10 million of those jobs are in the service industry. In the 50s, 70% of our jobs were in manufacturing. Now that number, 70%, is in the service sector. So, okay, people are working in gas stations and fast food restaurants that used to manufacture things. So you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and I actually am glad you just brought that up, because I wanted to take a second to talk about this sort of myth that now exists, that what you sort of said, minimum wage jobs are just jobs until you get something better, right?
Yeah.
In the current market, that's a complete myth, and I'll tell you why. Because we look at these companies that are some of the top companies in the world, right? Walmart, Amazon, and you also go into fast foods like McDonald's, right? McDonald's is one of the top grossing companies in the United States. They might not be a top 50, but if you're a top 100, you're fucking killing it in terms of corporate profit. If you have a company, McDonald's has been around since before I was alive, and it's been around since before any of us were alive, and it's been a dynamo of the food industry since before any of us were alive. With that being said, what's that, Yeti?
I was gonna say Ray Kroc hit it out of the park with that idea.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's the situation. If that's the case, that this industry has been around for that long, that is because people are choosing to spend money there. And if people are choosing to spend money at a place so consistently and so reoccurringly that it becomes a dynamo over the course of a half a century, then that tells me that that is a necessary business because people want that to exist. Now, is it necessary in the way that like food and shelter are necessary? No, there are other ways to eat. Like it's not agriculture, right? But our society has said McDonald's needs to exist. Therefore, working at McDonald's is an important job because it is something that we as a society need to continue. We need McDonald's and Burger King and all this. We tell them consistently, we want you to exist. But we turn around and say that the people who work there don't deserve anything. They don't deserve a good wage. They don't deserve employee protection. They don't deserve wage theft protection. They don't deserve time off. They don't deserve sick leave. They don't deserve tuition assistance. And we say that over and over again to the point where we love to say this phrase, go get a better job. And then what happens? COVID hits. It strikes down the food industry, among others. And all of a sudden, nobody wants to work for $7.25 because fuck it if I'm going to get COVID for this minimum wage bullshit. Right? I mean, you think about minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009, where before, when Spittin was there, it was $5. And since then, it's only gone up $2 and some change. That's absurd. Why the fuck would I want to go work at a McDonald's for that price?
Yeah. And I want to, real quick, you were talking about the unemployment.
Yeah.
Okay. Or not, you weren't talking about the unemployment. You're talking about the people not wanting to go back to work for minimum wage.
Well, I was going to talk about the unemployment.
I'm sorry. I just had a number here.
Yes.
That it said that the extra unemployment benefits paid 40% of the recipients of it more than they ever made working a full-time job.
Right.
So how fucked up is that?
When you have a situation where, and to be fair, we have advocated through COVID that the government should have paid people to stay home. But if you had done it properly, you could have paid them to stay home for 2 months and then everything could have gone back to normal and you would have had a much lower figure than you would now. But yes, when you have a situation where people cannot go to work and make more money than they can working full time, you have a situation where you need to have a sit down with these employers as a government and go, hey, what the fuck is happening that it is better for us to pay people than it is for you to pay people? What the fuck is happening here? How is that ever a possibility that we've come to?
How is that a sustainable business model?
Exactly. As both a government or a business.
Yeah, like you can't, if you want people to work and you can't pay, you're not paying them enough, you have to pay more. That's how the system works that they installed. And that's the idea of capitalism.
And see here, well, it's supposed to be.
Supposedly.
But, yeah. So here's
in theory, that's the idea of what capitalism is.
That and slavery, but we'll get back to that later. Here's the thing. Here's the details. All right. Sometime in the 70s, production quadrupled from what it was. Sometime in the 70s, production, if you look at production on a graph, it looks like a straight mountain. Production quadrupled. Workers didn't just suddenly become more productive. Technology increased. We started to get more reliable machines. We started to get automation to an extent. We started to get safer work practices. Regulations came in and made sure that people were protected. And when they started to have to worry less about protection, they were able to focus more on work. All of these things sort of created a perfect storm to have a production boom in the 70s, which is why we started to see the fruits of that in the late 80s, early 90s with an economic boom. But wages and labor costs did not rise to meet that production. So production quadrupled and wages virtually stayed the same, meaning that employees were now producing at a magnificently higher rate and being paid the same as when they were not. And through trickle-down economics and through wars on unions and other various intentional tools, both from government and private sector industry, they were able to convince those people that that was fair. And so to this day, you will see baby boomers and Gen Xers call millennials and Gen Zers lazy because we don't want to spend 60 hours, 70 hours a week in a 110-degree warehouse for $10. You hear this all the time. Back in my day, we worked 70 hours and we were proud of it.
Yeah.
Well,
back in your day, a house was 30 grand.
Yeah, congratulations, Ernest, that you were dumb enough to be manipulated into that system. But guess what? Like Yeti said, when you were going to college in the 70s, $30,000 a year, you were pretty much wealthy. Yeah. $30,000 a year now can't even cover rent for some people.
Well, and that's the whole thing, right? Like, if you come back to it, is you used to be able to have a family where one of the parents would be home and one of the parents worked. So you could work on keeping the family as a unit and teaching things as you go. But now you either have both parents working 50 hours a week, no time at home. The kids are growing up by themselves. So the kids are now raising themselves and going with whatever they think is right. And there's no one really to correct them anymore.
Or additionally, you also have millennials choosing to have less kids than any generation before them, going all the way back to like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Millennials en masse, myself included, are choosing not to have children. Now, I'm choosing not to have children for a plethora of different reasons, among of which I hate them, but neither here nor there. I just don't want children.
Well, and
part of that is because you can't afford it.
Yeah, I actually chose not to have children as well.
Yeah.
Like, me and my wife have talked about it here and there, but I've always not wanted to continue on the health problems I've had. Mm-hmm. Because as much as mine was a virus, my family also has cardiomyopathy in the family.
Yes.
So I don't want to pass that on to kids.
Yes.
Because I don't want someone to go through with that shit again. Right?
And
so kids are dirty and annoying, and I don't like sharing stuff.
Well, to make an interesting quick side point on what you just brought up too, and to go to sort of this McDonald's thing is, and this is a more complicated issue that I'm really summarizing just to make a quick point, but one of the other things that's true is that when you keep wages so low, one of the things that you do is you prevent people from being able to be healthy, because to eat a healthy diet in the United States is a bit expensive. You know, Whole Foods and organic produce and a vegan diet are a little more expensive than, McDonald's or Burger King or pizza rolls or, what have you. It's cheaper to eat unhealthy. And when you incentivize that. Yeah, and when you incentivize that, when you create a system where it's cheaper to eat like pigs, people will eat like pigs. And the more health you create, the more need to go to the doctor you create. And the more you need somebody to go to the doctor, you create a reoccurring patient. You create a financial pitfall for yourself where money will always be coming your way. So it's one of many ways that a low wage creates poor health for people, because if you can't afford to eat well, you won't. If you can afford to eat like shit, you will. Yeah. It's not a crazy idea.
Well, and to bring back that trickle-down economics, it's more of a trickle-up effect. Like, every little piece of a penny we get starts going up to people that have ridiculous amounts of money.
And I think Spitton was going to make a point, and I want to let him make it, and then we'll get into trickle-down economics. But I want to talk just a little bit more about minimum wage after he's done.
Yeah, I do too. But for the trickle-down economics, like, a lot of people don't know that back when America was flourishing its most, that the corporate tax on the super rich was at 70%.
Yes.
Reagan's the jack off that took it down to 40, I think. I'm pretty sure he took it down to 40 or 42%. Okay. And then that was the idea of trickle down economics. Okay. Once you save these super rich people all this money, then they're just going to bestow it on all the the help
Right.
that works for them, and it's going to enable them to open more factories and all this stuff. Okay, so then Obama lowered it to 35%.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because like I've said before on Twitter, Joe Biden is just the 11th consecutive term of Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And so Obama, he talked all this big game, and once he got in, he immediately started sucking Wall Street's dick, and so he took it down to 35%. Then fucking Trump gets in there, and he takes it down to 21%. And you know that this is what got him elected, and it's like he took it down to 21%, and he says, "Look what I'm doing here. I'm going to make it to where all these people want to move all their factories and shit back to America, and I'm going to make them so much money. And if they don't move them back to America, I'm going to tax the living fuck out of them to
Mhm.
where they'll have no choice. If you want to live in America and you want to reap the benefits of American dollars, then you have to make your products in America." Okay, so and then he said that they were going to make so much money because of this that everybody that worked for him was going to be a millionaire. Do you remember this?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay, and I mean, so I think we talked on our first podcast that people eat the shit out of hope,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that's why you get a Donald Trump and not a Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton, single payer will never pass,
Mhm.
and then you got Donald Trump, like as soon as Bernie gets kicked out, he's like, yeah, I like free healthcare too,
Yeah, and it's like never
when he
mind if
doesn't.
there was a logistical problem or not. It's just whether or not you want to take the word of these guys to an extent.
Yeah, and so still, like, to this day, all those people that voted for Trump again, they all think, not all of them, but the majority of them think that the only reason that they're not a millionaire is because of the Russiagate and all the shit that Trump,
Yeah.
the impeachments, all the shit that Trump went through, that the Democrats were just stopping him from making them all millionaires,
Yeah,
and
it's
and
sad.
and that's like, so Joe Biden, he runs on raising that corporate tax to 28%. Okay,
Mhm.
not even bringing it back up to Obama's level
Yeah.
at 35%, which was 7% less than Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Okay, just raising it to 28%, and he laughed at the idea of a wealth tax, whereas Bernie wanted the wealth tax, and he also wanted to have people own part of the places they work for, some kind
Yeah.
of incentivized labor to where you own the means of production.
Right.
And as soon as he started talking about that shit, man, that's when Bernie became a misogynistic Nazi
Yep.
Fidel Castro supporter.
Yep. And
And
I don't.
but real quick, I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say that Biden, whenever he said that behind closed door to his rich donors that nothing would fundamentally change, and like he still intended on raising that corporate tax from 21 to 28%, because it's like, dude, guys, you're still going to be making all kinds of money, still more money than Obama, and you made all kinds of money under Obama. It's not a
Mhm.
big deal. So then they were like, nope, and he was like, okay, how about 25%? We'll do 25% to appease the Republicans. The Republicans are like, get the fuck out of here with that shit. Nope. So now he's keeping Trump's tax cut,
Yep.
and that's where we're at now with the trickle down economics. You see how well that's worked.
Clearly, and I mean, here's
so
the
we're
thing.
down to, so we're currently at 21% then, the corporate
Yes.
tax.
And it's
Yes.
going to drop within the next 3 or 4 years.
And
So
it
that's
used
a
to be
49% drop.
It used to be 70%.
Yeah.
40,
So you think they say that a lot of experts are saying that by the time the Trump tax cuts truly come into fruition, if they're not interrupted, that it could be as low as like 17 or 16% as well.
so it's dropped 49%.
Yeah,
since
and
Reagan.
counting.
since
counting.
Reagan.
And
Since
That's absolutely appalling.
And that's not factoring in the decline of the cost of a dollar, like what a dollar's worth. That's not even factoring that in. That's literally just a strict percentage.
Yeah.
So you think about how much 70% in the 60s and 70s was worth as opposed to what 20 some percent is worth today. You know, you're talking about 7 or 8 figures.
Yeah.
Easily. Per person, or per corporation, not even like total. Like you're talking per corporate, corporate.
Well, that's
figure.
why the wealth gap is so massive now too. Is they basically just ran with inflation, screwed everyone under them, and just took all the money.
And to go to that Bernie point for just a second, like I think everybody here on this panel would agree that Bernie is a compromise for a lot of people, that he's not nearly as far as we want a leftist leader to be. You know, obviously, given the fact that he's since kowtowed to Biden at pretty much every opportunity and has very briefly or rarely stood up for anything since losing his election. But you see how even a compromise like Bernie Sanders had the machine against him as soon as he started talking anything socialist or anything social reform or anything even a democratic socialist, right? You see
anything
how quickly
pro-people. Anything pro-people.
You see how
anything
quickly
that
the
will
machine
cause them to lose any money at all.
You see how quickly the machine came to life for that, right? So you're lying to yourself if you're one of these people out there that thinks Democrats want to help people, because even the Democrat machine cannibalized him when he started talking about that. And the reason they did it, Republicans do it because they want fucking money. They just want to, most wealthy people are Republican conservatives and they want to keep themselves that way. The reason the Democrats do it, because if Bernie wins some shit and he gets in there and changes something, he now sets the bar higher, because now every Democrat that comes after him is going to have to do some shit. And they don't want to do fucking anything. That's why they let a Senate parliamentarian dictate to them whether or not you could increase a minimum wage. A non-elected position, somebody who doesn't have any actual authority or power, went to Kamala Harris and is like, fuck them kids. And Kamala's like, yeah, I agree. Fuck them kids. They don't want to do shit for you. And
a minimum wage that has been the same since George Bush.
Yeah.
Since he signed. Now it's been the same since 2009, but George Bush is the one that signed it into law.
Yeah, it happened. It just happened to come into fruition in Obama's first term.
Yes.
The cost of bombs went up during that time.
Now, I bring that up to bring up this. Okay. If you are out there and I want to talk directly to these people who think that $7.25 is a fair minimum wage, like Spittin said at the top of this, the idea that a minimum wage job is something you get until you get something better, right? Okay. First of all, I want to just preface by saying, fuck anyone that pulls somebody down who's grinding in any way. If you're out there working at all, I respect you. If your job is picking up dog shit or your job is like guiding a cruise missile, like if you are capable of doing something, I respect you. Now, that being said, if you're out there and you think that this is the way that it goes, that $7.25 is fair because the goal is to go to college or go to trade school and get a better job down the line, let me pose this scenario to you, okay? It is not even possibly crazy to think that the reason we have a minimum wage is because, as Chris Rock once said, if an employer could pay him less, then they would. That's true, because this country once came from a situation where we didn't pay certain groups of people anything. And in fact, those people themselves were labor property. They were slaves, right? So this country began from the very beginning origins of this country. We had a group of people whose job it was to work for no money and to be property. Okay. So we got rid of that once upon a time, sort of. It's not completely gone to this day. And then it became, okay, well, we're going to pay this group less and this group less and this group less than this other working group. And then you can't do that. You have to start paying everybody equally, regardless of race, religion, sex, gender, whatever the case. Okay, well, we're going to hide our wages behind salaries and incentivize a culture where you don't talk about your wages, because then if you start talking about your wages with your coworkers, then people will figure out that they're not being paid well. And at every corner of the United States fiscal market, employers have found some way to either reduce or hide the wages of their workers. And in order to generate as much profit as possible. The coal sector, for example, had executives that would talk about, can we save $12 million a year by cutting, health and retirement benefits from people who worked for us for 60 plus years? Can we save money by cutting back mine restrictions and regulations on detonation equipment and mining equipment, and to create check incentives for workers to disregard their own safety and work faster and faster and faster and faster? There's a certain guy that I won't name because he has a habit of suing anybody all the way down to the most pissant level like us. So I won't say his name for that, but he himself has had a lot of problems with the law because of some regulations where his mines have created earthquakes and done damaged the environment to a point where people died as a result. And that's just one industry. You look at all of these industries who routinely move warehouses out of country to places where there are no or such pissant minimum wage laws that people are paid cents to the dollar. They will move all of their plants out of the United States and put them in those countries, because not only do they get the tax write-off for not being on shore, but they can pay people less than $1 an hour to make products. And you out there as consumers will go, well, yeah, we want cheap goods, right? Like, I don't want to buy an iPhone if it's $1,500. Well, more and more that seems to not be a problem for you as these technologies continue to go up in cost. But you look at, where does your money actually go when you buy a good that's built overseas? If I say, hey, Spittin', you bought a smartphone, where do you think most of that money went? What would your answer be?
Corporations.
Well, yeah, but like what country, I should say? Like, where do you think geometrically your money's going?
Oh shit! I guess China.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's China, but the actual truth of the matter is that it's Germany and Japan. Because Japan and Germany actually create a lot of the raw resource necessary for those devices. Not the lithium mines, that comes from a lot of Africa and places in that geometric region. But in terms of like the plastics and the metals, a lot of that's made in Germany and Japan. And then the phones are assembled in China. So you're just paying for assembly at that point. All the pieces are already there. Japan actually gets a vast majority of your money when you buy a smartphone. Now, Japan is a different monster all on its own, because Japan is one of the strangest economies in the world, in that I wonder sometimes how it functions between some of the low wages and the high cost of living, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton of poverty over there. So maybe there's some mystery that I don't know about. But I digress.
I'll look into that.
You think about all...
I mean, real quick, like from what I've heard or studied or whatever, Japan takes care of their people.
Yeah, that's very possible.
And they are very in debt, just like we are, right. Except they print their own money, just like we do. And anytime like there's a disaster or something, they just help their people. And they don't care to print a bunch of money and go into more debt to do it. That's my understanding of Japan.
Now, I digress on that, and thank you for that info, because that's good to have. But I digress on that. The point being that since it was allowed to happen, these companies have been moving off seas, assembling offshore, and importing, because the cost to import goods is cheaper than the cost to manufacture goods in a lot of cases. The only time that factories remain in America, and I bet if you match this to the data, it would line up perfectly. The only time that factories and warehouses stay in America is either you have like a bullheaded conservative CEO who's like all America all the time, no matter what, or when the cost to import is higher than the cost to assemble. I would bet dollars of donuts that that's the case. And the reason for that is because these guys don't want to lose any money. If they could, they would pay you nothing. All of these, McDonald's, Walmart, Amazon, any company, Verizon, any company you could think of, if they could pay you nothing, they would. And that's why the concept of a minimum wage exists. But in my personal opinion, minimum wage is now an antiquated concept, because I think it's time that we change the legal framework around it. If you redefine minimum wage and you now legally redefine it as livable wage, and you tie it to things like cost of living per capita, average cost of healthcare per year per citizen, average monthly expenses for XYZ bills. And you make it so that employers now have to pay an average that is also directly tied to, say, their earnings. So maybe you create a situation where livable wage is dependent upon if a CEO makes $1 million, if there's a 1 in 5 ratio to income, that means his lowest paid employee has to make 200,000. All of a sudden now you have created a situation where the wage is necessarily required legally to grow with time. Because if minimum wage had grown to match that production boom that I talked about in the 70s and had stayed on that current rate matching for inflation with today's production, minimum wage would be something close to $30. Which is why I was happy to see a lot of people in our poll identifying that the minimum wage should be up over $20, because that's true. If minimum wage matched production, which is apolitical, if you're out there and you're conservative and or a liberal and you're goffing at that statement, it is apolitical to say that production is at a rate that is so high that if wages had continued to match that as they should have, minimum wage would be about $30 an hour today. I don't care what you think about that or what you believe about that. The fact is that since that did not happen, people across the world, including you who scoffs at the idea, are being robbed of your own money that you have earned. And I have said this from day one, that a healthy economy is necessarily dependent on more people spending more money. The more people that have more money, the healthier your economy is. And I want to go to another topic here in a second, but I have to make one last point real quick.
I want to make one after that.
That's very good. Have you guys heard this language? And Yeti, you might not have heard it as much given that you're Canadian. I don't know how they talk on their news up there, but Spittin', I guarantee you've heard this idea that corporate CEOs and heads of companies and hedge fund investors are what we call in the United States job creators.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, it's the same kind of speech.
It's
one of the world's greatest
myth.
myths.
Well, you would think with the advancement of society, we would actually be working less.
You would think that
more.
You would think that, but the
like you look at other
propaganda
countries.
machine.
Yeah, because you look at other countries, their work scale is coming back, but their societies are advancing.
You go over to certain European countries and the conservatives are jerking themselves off right now. Like, oh, he's going to talk about Denmark. Yeah, I am going to fucking talk about Denmark, because you go over to these countries like Denmark and Sweden and Switzerland, and they have minimum wages that average out to something like $23 to $25 US. Like if you transition their currency into US, it's about $23 to $25. And everybody talks about, well, good luck with your $14 Big Mac. First of all, if it takes $14 to give these people money, fuck it, I'll pay. But secondly, that's a myth too, because the average cost of a Big Mac in those countries went up by about 32 cents. So, like, if 32 cents is a deal breaker for you, you need to go talk to your boss because you're being robbed of your wages. But I digress. The job creation myth is this idea that people at the top of companies create jobs, and that's a charitable act, and we need to reward that, because without those people, we would not have jobs. There's two reasons why this is a myth. The first reason is that providing jobs for people is not a charitable act. A company's goal is to produce money. To do that, you need to have labor. So job production is a necessary requirement for fiscal growth for a company's goal. That's not charity. They're only doing that because they have no choice. If they don't do that, they will not gain money. These businesses like Amazon and Walmart have to employ people or else they don't exist. So that's not charity when Amazon gives you a job, especially when Amazon will terminate you for being slow, in quotation marks. And if somebody dies on your plant floor, they'll make you work around them. That's not charity. The second reason this is a myth is this, and this is one of my favorite discussions, and I'm going to make a rhetorical point to make it. Yeti, do you like Domino's pizza?
Yes.
All right, Spittin', do you like Pizza Hut?
Sure.
Okay. Let's say tomorrow as a collective planet, everybody in the entire world decided, hey, you know what? Fuck Domino's Pizza. Fuck Pizza Hut. We're never ordering from those places again, ever. All the corporate sponsors and partners lose their partnerships. The organizations lose all their workers because nobody's ordering, so they can't afford to pay anymore. After 2 months, Domino's and Pizza Hut go completely out of business, never to be heard from again. Is the CEO of Domino's and the CEO of the group of the parent company that owns Pizza Hut, are they job creators now?
No.
What happened to those jobs? They're just gone, right? Because the demand for that product went away. So what creates the need for jobs is demand. And who creates demand?
Customers.
Customers. And what are customers? People spending money.
Yeah.
And the more money people have to spend, the more demand is created, thus creating more opportunity for production. Now, in that scenario, the CEO of Domino's, that figurehead is not a job creator. The person paying for pizza is creating the need for that job. You can say that CEOs and figureheads are job providers, and I won't argue with that rhetoric, but that's meaningless in the context of an economy that is driven by spending. You have to spend money to generate demand. And the fewer people that have money, the less demand that is generated, the less need for business exists. And that's what creates this corporate consolidation culture where 3 or 4 companies in any major industry run everything, right? In cell phones, it's Verizon, T-Mobile, and that's it used to be Sprint, but Sprint's gone now. Sprint got consolidated. AT&T's out there, but I doubt too many people still use AT&T. But it's still, that's the point being that there's only 3 or 4 options. In cable,
and
you've
the
got
ownerships of those groups are getting smaller and smaller.
Yes. In cable, you have things like Spectrum and Armstrong and DirecTV and Xfinity, and that's about it. And those even don't even compete. They've signed anti-compete contracts with each other, so they regionalize, so they don't even have to compete. Now, if you live in Pennsylvania and you live in Montana, you can get DirecTV just about anywhere, but you don't get to choose between your cable provider. You have to go with the one that's in your area. You look at fast food, and it's McDonald's, Taco Bell, KFC, Arby's, Wendy's, and Burger King. And you get a couple others, but that's it. Every major industry is headed by just 3 or 4 companies who are shark enough to survive because our culture does not have enough people spending enough money to generate legitimate competition. So it's a flaw in capitalism to suggest that the more money people at the top have, that they will redistribute it, because they've demonstrated not only will they not, but they don't care if they do ever, because that money will always cyclically go back to them. Because there's only options. There's only so many options. It's a myth, because if you had more people spending more money, everyone, including the wealthy, would have more money. They would be wealthy too. But the problem for them is that if you close that gap even a little bit, you cut off the exclusivity of it. And they love being part of their private little club of job creators.
You have to be a narcissist to get to that point in life.
100%. And you have to be a sort of a person who enjoys seeing others in pain.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to obtain that wealth. And is it theoretically possible for someone to obtain that wealth and be ignorant to what creation of that amount of wealth causes the population? I don't know. I doubt it. I think to some level you have to be conscious of it. But there's a difference between being conscious of it and being, not caring about it and being indifferent to it completely. And that's a little bit of sociopath. You've got to be a little bit of a sociopath to be that wealthy.
Well,
now, Spittin', you had a point to make as well.
Yeah, this is my point. And I'm glad that you hit on the CEOs, because it runs right into it.
Perfect.
Yeah, so in 1965, the rate of CEO to worker pay was 15-1.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems doable, right?
Sure.
Yep.
I mean,
with some regulation, but sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna complain about that. If some person has, 500 people under their employ, like, you're whatever, you're the boss, you're making $15 to my $1, whatever. I'm not going to freak out. Now, let's go back to 1978, where this whole podcast started. For some reason, in 1978, the CEO pay, or since 1978, I should say, the CEO pay to worker contrast has risen 1,322%, whereas the worker pay has only risen 18%,
which
in the
is
same period.
That's such a difference on a graph. It would look like Mount Everest.
Yes. So now, instead of, as of today, instead of 1965 when it was 15-1, as of today, America's CEOs make 351 more times than the typical worker.
Yeah.
Now, let me just put this into perspective and I'll be done with it.
Sure.
Because it's hard to wrap your head around that number. Let's just say you do make $7.25, the federal minimum wage. Well, then multiply $7 times 351, and that's what that's what the CEO of the company you work for is making per hour compared to you.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to put in for a little bit of perspective, the average CEO in 1 year will make 9 times what that of a typical worker will in their entire lifetime.
Yep.
If that doesn't make you sick and think that we need to fix this system, then I don't know what will. Because if this guy who probably lucked into that job, he was born wealthy,
into it. Yep.
He was groomed to have this job, and I'm not saying that he's not smart in any way. He's probably got the best education money can buy. But
literally, that's exactly the thing. Best money can buy, something, an opportunity a lot of people don't have.
But if you're telling me that he can sit in some cushy office and just do absolutely dick, while the people that he built that not that he even built the company, that he's just running, and those people are down there beneath him breaking their backs and still struggling to get by because, like you said, $30,000 back in the 70s, that was pretty good cash, right?
Yeah.
That was back before people had credit cards. That was back before people had car payments.
Yep.
You bought a car, you just paid cash for it.
Most of the time, yeah.
I mean, most of the time, I'm not talking about Corvette or anything.
Sure.
Okay.
No point to argue the nuance,
Yeah, we're talking $1,200, $1,600 for a new car, or whatever. And so people didn't have credit card payments. They didn't have car payments. And their house payment was like, $150 a month. And they got to own it after 15 years.
Yeah.
And so, but today, like you said, $30,000 isn't enough to barely pay the rent, right?
Right.
Okay. I got into an argument with somebody the other day saying that you should be ashamed of yourself if you are an adult male making less than $36,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And all I could do was supply them with a graphic that showed that 50% of our workforce back in 2019. That's the thing about these studies, man. They don't keep them up to date. So we're talking a pandemic and another economic collapse since 2019, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so back in 2019, 50% of the United States workforce made less than $35,000 a year.
Yes. And that's men, women,
it's only going to go down. It's only going to go down.
I did the math for you on that wage difference.
Yes.
So if a worker's making $7 an hour, the CEO is making $2,400
an hour.
An hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
fair.
the difference.
Which a minimum wage worker would have to work 40 hours for something like 4 months to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
that's ridiculous.
So in what system, and all these people that are just like, well, capitalism is great. That's the reason why capitalism is great, because it does make billionaires or whatever. Do you know how many billionaires there are in the world?
Not a whole bunch, but they're mostly here.
2,000,
100?
2,365 out of a population of over 7 billion.
Yeah.
And
So
and
that's
do
5
you know that,
guillotines per hour.
Yeah.
and do you know that those 2,365 billionaires, their wealth increased by 54% over the pandemic
Yes.
here in the United States?
Yeah.
The last thing I saw was that the American billionaires had made $800 billion during the pandemic,
Yep.
while more and more people, I mean, 55 million people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
We've got 12 million people that is, and I don't know how that is an accurate estimate, but that's what they say. 12 million people fixing to be homeless.
Yep.
Try and find a study that shows how much back rent debt there is currently. I can't find one. The closest I can find was in January. It was $32 billion in back debt. January. They quit talking about it. But back then, back in November, 23 million people were set to be homeless. So, I mean, unless Santa Claus fucking brought them a nice Christmas present to pay that back rent, or, they were able to invest their $1,600 Joe Biden gave them and into GameStop.
Yeah.
And make a killing.
I wish I had done that.
Yeah. But that's another thing.
Look at how quickly they were able to like just diffuse that and screw everyone over. It was like, oh, you guys are figuring out the system. We're just going to stop it then for a few minutes.
Well, let's go ahead and segue into if you don't care, Swerve, like about the stock market.
Yeah. Well, one last quick point, real quick.
Yeah.
All of what we just talked about still does not address one major point that I just want to bring a quick light to, and it would take a whole nother episode to get into this. So I'm literally just quick lighting it. But all of what we just talked about is still not even including the intentional roadblocks, redlining, and firewalls built up against the African American community when they started to finally get money too.
Yeah.
So
That was with the 70s?
I mean, even still, people like a black man or a black woman makes a significant portion less as compared to a white person in the same job. But
I was just saying back to started around the 70s.
Give or take, probably. I mean, it's that. I mean, truth be told, it's just a hard figure to nail down because it's still happening. But that's a whole episode. And we don't have time to get into that whole situation right now. And honestly, the three of us are probably not the most qualified voices. So I don't want to go too deep into that. But yes, we could talk about the Stark market, the Tony Stark market. We can talk about the stock market as well, because I love that myth that the stock market is the economy. But that's just one thing. Let me hear what you have to say about it, Spittin'.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, in the CARES Act, the stock market got a $1.5 trillion loan. Okay. And what else? What can you think? If I say $1.5 trillion, what comes to mind?
The military.
Well, how about student debt?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's exactly $1.5 trillion. Nobody's mentioning anything about helping these fucking kids out.
Yeah, you're right.
Predatory loans.
Right.
But the goddamn stock market starts to fucking hiccup a little bit.
Yeah, and real quick, that's another episode as well, but real quick, let's hit on some major economic-based points about student loan, right? Cannot go into bankruptcy with student loan. It will not go into bankruptcy. It does not dissipate if you die. It goes to your next of kin. And if there are no next of kin, then it can actually go up against your estate, which is wild. Student debt, they claim all the time that they don't have the ability to forgive it, and then find little ways and nooks and crannies to forgive like very specific unhelpful amounts of student debt to like people who make over $100,000 a year, or Kamala Harris's ridiculous campaign idea to give it to people who start up businesses that become worth a certain amount within like 2 years of graduation. Like that'll be good for the 7 people who pull that off, you know?
Yeah.
And you have no idea how many parents kill themselves each year because the kids don't have any credit.
Yes.
Because they're just coming out of high school. So
and
they have to have a cosign, and they have to have a cosign on the loan. So their parents co-sign on it because they're their kids, even though if they know like, oh my God, he's gonna fuck this up, whatever. It's your kid. So it's like I gotta do it for them. But so many horror stories, man, of kids defaulting on those loans and parents not being able to pay it off for them and them being financially ruined.
Yeah.
For supporting their 18-year-old kid.
And you think about the fact that somebody can take out, let's just say $50,000 in student loans, okay? Pay faithfully on it every month, and 10 years later owe $125,000. A figure that was higher than the original loan that they took out in the first place. Because most people can afford to pay on the loan, but they can't afford to pay on the interest, which causes the loan to basically become eternal. And that's just true. That's not political.
Screw you.
So, I mean, that's one of the aspects about student loans and how they can screw a generation. Again, more people having more money solves that problem.
Millennials. There's 74 million millennials. And I know, I'm sorry. I throw around a lot of numbers.
That's okay. People out there, if you're listening, they have a responsibility to verify this information as well. They shouldn't just take our word for it.
Yeah, and I just keep these numbers in my head, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 74 million Americans that are millennials.
Yeah.
Okay. And
myself included.
Okay. And I'm, depends on, how you, some people say late 70s, some people say 82, whatever. But, so I don't know what metric they're going by there, but 74 million is the number I saw, and they have 4.3% of the wealth in America. Okay. Now, to put that into numbers, like 74 million people is roughly 20% of our population.
Right.
Okay. And these millennials who, we're not kids anymore. We should have wealth. We should have some money, but yet we only have 4.3% of the wealth.
And it's more than just no, I just want to real quick. I just want to say it's more than just fiscal wealth too. It's not like literally money in bank accounts. Millennials are lacking in fiscal assets and collateral as well. So they don't have property and they don't have things that banks can use to justify credit either. So millennials literally don't have wealth in the physical sense and also in the sort of economic, realm of consolidation and of collateral either.
Now, and the 50 wealthiest people in America have more money than half of the population. Okay. Yeah. So, and Howard Zinn will say like, that's not the bottom half, the bottom half ain't got shit. It's the other half. And so 50 people have more wealth than 170 million people. 50 people.
Yeah.
That's not
ridiculous,
a successful system.
That's a football team. That means that, that's a football team's worth of people have more money than the entire fan base of the NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for perspective.
It's all predatory practices too.
Of course it is.
Like
capitalism by its very nature is a predatory practice.
Yeah.
By its very nature.
To this after Spaden goes, but I got some numbers from like when I ran my small business that just are obscene.
Sure.
So.
Okay, so with the back to the Wall Street, I know we
Yeah.
deviated, but I think it was
It was
necessary.
important. Yeah.
So they got 1.5 trillion in bailouts from the CARES Act. Okay.
Yes.
And so last episode we talked about how Twitter wasn't real life. Okay.
Mhm.
But you know what's really not real life? Fucking Wall Street.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The metric by which our economic success is measured, it's not real. It crashed in 2008 and it's been artificially held together ever since.
Yep.
Obama made it so it can never fail again.
Yep.
So we, if it starts to free fall like it did last year, it freezes.
Yes.
If it dips below a certain number,
It just
they
stops.
stop it. And then the Fed is allowed to go in and just add a couple zeros on their fucking computer.
Yeah,
That's not
and it magically
real money.
regulates
That's
itself.
not real money. Those are just
It doesn't
two
even
zeros
exist.
adding on to a bunch of other zeros.
Yeah.
So the stock market has cheat codes like video games.
Yeah. And all
Okay?
of this is less than I think 10% of people even have a vested interest in the stock market.
Well, yeah,
So that
it's only the high earners that this helps. This isn't helping your average person that invests in the stock market to try and add a little bit of padding to their retirement funds.
It's just a fucking shell game. Bernie Madoff showed you guys that.
Yeah, it's just a Ponzi scheme.
It's just a shell game.
Yeah.
And so like, how fair is it? Okay, that $1.5 trillion that they gave to Wall Street, that will never be paid back. It won't even be mentioned again.
Nope.
That is real, but that is real taxpayer money that somebody's got to pay for these guys to go and have fucking fun with. But God forbid you take the same 1.5 trillion and forgive these fucking kids student loan debt.
Yeah.
And
allow a generation to flourish.
Yeah.
And push the reset button.
Because Obama
things that
showed
would
us
actually help the economy.
Yeah.
They don't want to do.
Because Obama showed us with Occupy Wall Street that the government sides with the banks. Okay.
Yes.
Fuck you people. Get back to work and shut up and we'll take care of it because they're not going to have another collapse like they did in 2008. Not as, I mean, even though it's already happened, even though it's never fixed itself, they're not going to have bankers jumping out of fucking 50-story windows again, man.
No,
because bankers are more important than people. Only fucking poor people are allowed to kill themselves now.
Right. And you know what is the best about that? And it's one of the most great ironies of the capitalism discussion amongst Americans is this. As a result of the 2008 financial crisis, Wall Street and the banks and all of those executives, of which, mind you, one person went to prison for all of that. Mind you this, as a result of that, they were given the greatest government safety net of all time. So that, like you said, the stock market could never truly crash again. The banks could never truly fail again. Partially as a result of repealing Glass-Steagall, but there's a lot more than just that goes into it. These banks now have safety nets that are so strong and powerful that they're able to do the same shit they were doing in 2008 in other markets now without consequence. And this is demonstrable. If you ever go to those auto dealers that are self-finance, you go and get your own financing and we'll sell you a car you have no business having because you can't pay for it, right? Yeah. It's the same exact practice and it takes place there. That's why a single car can be bought and sold and repossessed like 20 times in the span of 3 years because it's the same auditory lending shark practices that they do. And you know, it's funny when you think about it because you've created an empire that has a safety net that's protected so that it can never truly fail and that it will always be picked back up. And that if in the event that it does fail, there will be a way for it to recover, which is
that's not real.
Yeah,
It's just not real life.
But when citizens ask for that same thing, when they say, "Hey, we need a system that if a person goes bankrupt, we can they can pick themselves back up. We need a system that when people are struggling, they can get food and shelter and medicine. We need a system when people are desperate that they can find hope." And we call that system welfare, or we call that system food stamps, or we call that system whatever. Suddenly, we have to talk about leeches and people who feed off the government and people who defraud
socialism.
the government. That's socialism. Well, my friend, what do you call a situation where a bank can fuck around and find out and get saved by the government? That's the same system. The difference is I don't give a fuck about the 2% approximate claims of welfare that are fraudulent, as opposed to the some 60 or 80% that are legitimate and the other 18% that are kind of murky. Because even if all 100% of welfare recipients were committing fraud, it would not fiscally touch the number of these corporations that have corporate welfare, where the government protects them and bails them out with all of our money time after time after time after time. If a person fails, an individual person, and they file bankruptcy or they go on welfare or whatever the case, if you even want to call that failure, because I don't think anybody's ever been set up to succeed unless they inherited their wealth. But you think about that. When a person fails, they become the scum of the earth. They get a stigma around them. They become a lesser. Everybody looks down on it. It becomes a situation where it's a race to the bottom. But if you're at the bottom, you're disgusting. And then you look at corporations like Verizon, who have taken bailout money, GM, who have taken bailout money, ExxonMobil, who have taken bailout money, banks that have taken bailout money, but those are job creators. They have to be sustained because without them, they don't function. Flip the script and apply what I've been saying, that more people spending more money creates a good economy. And it incentivizes the government to bail out people, because if people had money and could spend money, you would never need to bail out another corporation ever again, because the people would do it with their own spending, with their free spending, with their libertarian spending. You would never need to bail out a corporation. They would have all the money they could ever want, and so would everybody else. You would never need to have social welfare, because the existence of wealth amongst the middle and lower classes would eliminate the need for any welfare anywhere, period.
Yeah. I don't understand how banks are supposed to be the financial advisors and then need a bailout. How bad are you at your own fucking job?
No, they're very good at their job, because their job isn't to make money for regular people. It's to make money for themselves. That's
the problem with banks.
That's the only reason interest even exists, is to generate profit for the banks. What is interest? It's a fee for doing business. That's literally all that interest is. There's no metric out. Like, my fucking guitars don't gain interest from sitting on my wall. That doesn't even make sense. Like, if I put my money in a savings account, it has an interest of like 0.7%, that it'll gain 0.7% interest. Whereas if I have a fucking overdraft payment, that interest rate's at like 30. Or if I go get a payday loan because I'm fucking struggling, that interest rate is at 35%. That's literally just a cost for doing business. And they will give lower interest rates to people they want to create repeat business with, and higher interest rates with people who they have turned into their profit. That's literally all that interest is. And anybody who tells you otherwise is fucking lying to you. Interest is how banks make money, and all it is a cost of doing business. It's bullshit. It's absolute defrauding bullshit.
Okay, so I ran a small delivery company a few years back, and I just did my taxes because I'm extremely behind everything.
Right.
So January I paid $487 in bank fees and interest.
Right.
Then $234, $593, $519, $411, $301, $363, $457, $380, $461, $466, 300.
A month?
Yeah.
And that's Canadian, right?
350. Yeah. So I spent $5,000 on my small business. I had like 4 employees. We drove around delivering stuff and dropping it off.
Yeah.
We were making like $7 to $10 a delivery. We're not fucking making bank here.
No.
Yeah. That's just my interest fees. That's not even counting my Moneris bank machines that they charged me like 1% for every transaction. Plus, they charged me rental fees for the debit machines that I had. So I was paying out like, that was my banking fees. I probably spent another $2,000-$3,000 a year on just my debit terminals. That's not including
For driving a vehicle.
I mean,
that's for just my business costs.
Yeah, that's not even his independent cost.
That's not even counting my cost for my car. I also had
the mileage.
Yeah, I also had an office that was $500 a month.
Yeah.
Then I also paid my employees like 80% of what the delivery fees were. So when I talk about socialism, I don't just mean for like everyone. I practice this in my own business. I gave as much money as I possibly could to my employees to make sure they were happy.
Right.
Like, so, yeah, I basically broke even in this business.
And you know what? Like we have examples of that in the small business, but we also have examples of that in major businesses too. And there's a guy I want to talk about, and I guess that he's a little controversial, but as far as I can see, the things that are being said about him, I've never been able to verify from an independent source. So I'm not uncomfortable talking about this person until that time. But the CEO of Gravity Payments, Dan Price, you guys know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, he's one of my idols because he managed to do what I would like to do. I just could never build the business that way. So
for those of you who don't know, Dan Price is the CEO of a company called Gravity Payments, which is basically an agency that sort of creates the POS systems you see in like bars and restaurants and things like that. And he was one of these guys, typical CEO, making a shit ton of money, and came to realize that his employees were leaving in droves and otherwise not doing things because they couldn't afford anything. So he cut his CEO pay down to like $1 million a year, I think, and reinvested his money in his people so that the lowest paid employee at his place of work made $70,000 a year, which is about like 30 some dollars an hour, I think.
Yeah.
So the lowest paid person makes $70K a year. He noticed immediately that people started going out more. People took more time off when they needed to get healthy. People started having children, which I talked about earlier, millennials choosing not to have children. He noticed that his employees were having more children, that they were happier and more productive. And he also created a systemic culture where if you need 10 minutes to fuck off and do nothing, do it. He says himself, I would rather see you doing nothing for 10 minutes than suffering at your desk laboring when you need to take a break. He's created a culture where his employees actually went out and bought him a car that he had always wanted because they were so grateful to him. Now, you can talk about, is that staged or is that presented? I don't know. Like, I'm not an insider, right? But I think there's a chance, a greater than zero chance, that a lot of the slander that comes out about him is intentional, designed to slander him to try to show that when they couldn't prove that his fiscal model would fail, they're trying to now assassinate his personal model.
Yeah. I'd like to add one thing onto your point. Sorry.
Yeah.
So one of the turning points for him was he saw a McDonald's application on one of his, I think it was almost a manager type.
Yes, one of his managers was working a second job at McDonald's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that story now that you bring it up.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw that in there because it gave a bit of context.
And the fact that company is succeeding, that it's a pretty damn good company. They have something like a backlog of 13,000 applications or so, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And Dan has said he tries to send a personalized message to everyone. I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't. That's a pretty crazy thing to overtake. But his company, the long short of it is that his company is working with that model. His employees are happy. They don't leave very often, and when they do, it's for it's not always for personal. It's not always for business reasons. And it's a direct demonstration that is a 100% possibility that you can run a company like that.
Yep.
So it's a demonstration to your point and our larger points here that more people having more money creates a better system. Dan Price is in what his company is doing is proving that. And that's why a lot of people don't like it, because it is proving that capitalism is predatory by its very nature.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just a rigged fucking game, man. Like we talked about the CARES Act, giving the 1.5 trillion to the Wall Street. Well, they also gave trillions in bailouts to the oil companies, to the airline industry, to they gave $50 billion to the cruise line industry.
Right.
Okay. So cruise lines, they're like registered in the Bahamas and Panama and shit, so they can avoid some kind of they can avoid American taxes, and they also avoid some kind of maritime laws because of it or something.
Yeah, there's certain islands that are separated from anywheres because they don't have tax laws. Because at one point in time, like the Grand Cayman Islands, for instance, the people on that island saved one of the royalties in like the late 1800s. And so the British monarchy considered their debt paid to the monarchy, so they don't pay taxes.
Right.
Okay.
That's how it works.
So here we've got so the other thing is the people that work on those cruise ships, they're not American employees.
Nope.
Right?
Right.
Okay. So we just gave them $50 billion. You can't tell me that that's not some kind of like money laundering thing for these wealthy people that the cruise. Okay, so the cruise ship industry suffered because of the pandemic. Was it that
industry
great?
that didn't.
Yeah, was it that great to fucking begin with?
No, everybody says they hate fucking cruises.
Yeah,
I actually love cruises.
Well, fuck you, Yeti. You're not proving our point here.
Cut them off.
The one thing I do when we go on cruises, though, is we always try to give us as much extra money to the actual like people on board. So like, because if you ever go on a cruise, don't tip in your bill, tip the people in cash.
Right.
Because it's the only way they keep it.
Oh.
So you tip people in cash as much as possible.
But yeah, back to Spitting's point though.
Yeah. Okay. So, no, you're good. I'm covering a lot of shit here. So they also gave $750 billion to the real estate industry.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about this for a second, since we've had some fucking podcasts on the eviction crisis.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, maybe we just figured out, because I didn't know this number. Okay. I got this number through research. Maybe we just figured out why the Black Rocks of the world, and I always use them as the example.
Yeah, sure.
But the big time real estate corporations, that maybe we figured out why they've been able to not only not get rent from people, but that they've started to buy the houses from the landlords, the small time landlords that have been suffering, that I say suffering, but you know what I mean, that haven't been able to get their rent money for a year. So now these investment firms are buying the property from the landlords that just see no end in sight for the eviction moratorium, right?
Right.
So $750 billion, $750 billion. You're telling me like we couldn't have we couldn't have made all these landlords whole with this fucking money?
Right.
How did it have to all go? I mean, where did it go? That is a lot of fucking money, man. And also, I just want to say that the CARES Act was billed as this saving grace. Nancy Pelosi will still get up there and talk about the CARES Act. We did the CARES Act. We put money on people's tables, you know, and it's like you gave people $1,200.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Shut the fuck up. You gave people $1,200 because the CARES Act was designed to keep small businesses open, right? Remember that bullshit?
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead.
I just found something about BlackRock that I want to add at the end. I just wanted to get that out there.
Okay. So the mega rich, right? They swooped in as soon as these PPP loans became available. Okay. 80% of the money in the CARES Act that was allocated for small businesses, it went 80% of it went to millionaires. Okay. And the wealthiest of the millionaires averaged $1.8 million in their PPP loans. We got $1,200.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, $1.8 million on average for millionaires during the CARES Act. They care about you because it says so in the act. It says cares, so they have to care.
Right.
Oh, it fucking pisses me off, man, to no end. But yeah, so that's I just wanted to say, you know, it's the largest upward transfer of wealth in human history.
Yes.
And you know, it makes the 2008 bailout look like you know, a small business loan for somebody. It's grotesque, and we will be paying for it for the rest of our lives and the rest of our kids' lives, and so on and so on.
And it'll never get any better unless, you know, certain people,
unless we hit the streets, unless we do something, quit fucking voting for goddamn like I'm in this argument right now about, oh my god, if you don't support Gavin Newsom, you support Larry Elder. I don't give a fuck.
I don't support anybody at this point.
I mean, Jesus Christ, you know. Well, Larry Elder, he doesn't think that there should be carbon emission, like regulation on carbon emissions. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, here's Gavin Newsom and his 1,200 drilling permits that he signed in February, while his fucking state is literally on fire and they have no clean water to drink.
Yeah.
The guy is owned by
oil execs.
Gordon Getty, JP Getty, the oil baron. Yeah. And so that's why, like, it's like he comes out and he says, hey, I'm not going to sign any more drilling permits. And then all of a sudden, Gordon Getty calls and he's like, hey, my buddies, they need about 200 more drilling permits. And he's like, man, I just said that I'm not going to sign anymore. And it's like, yeah, well, we don't give a fuck. Do you like your money? You like, because he was nothing, you know, before the Gettys got a hold of him. Now he's at least $30 million on paper. And they said that, like, the more I studied on him, they said that in evaluating his assets, he can write off, if it's $10 million worth of assets, it can be the same as $1 million in assets.
Right.
So he could be worth $300 million if he's 30 million on paper. And I've got people in my mentions telling me that I mean, I support some fucking Republican. If I keep trashing Gavin Newsom, fuck you. Fuck these people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't vote for any of them. They're all killing. They all voted in unison for this CARES Act. Every one of them. In unison. All of them. The progressives, the Republicans, the Democrats, the Libertarians, all of them. They all voted for it. So, and it's the biggest fuck you that anybody's ever given. Yeah. That's it.
So do you guys know what company managed the bailout in 2008?
God, I feel like I do. Do you know the answer?
What is it?
Yep.
What is it?
BlackRock.
That's shocking.
BlackRock big fund scene winning U.S.
What?
bailout
I didn't hear the
job.
question.
He said, "Do you know what
Who
company?"
managed?
Go ahead.
Who managed the 2008 bailout for the United States?
Uh,
A $700 or $700 billion
it was
financial
BlackRock, yeah.
rescue plan.
Yeah.
It was BlackRock's. And then so
Go figure.
yeah, BlackRock is profiting by fixing toxic assets it helped plug in 2008.
Mhm.
They forged a $6.3 trillion giant in the decade after. That was from 2018 from Bloomberg.
Hey, and like our first episode, when,
Yeti, spitting, you cut out there, buddy.
yeah, I because
Oh, his microphone's cutting out a whole bunch.
Yeti, I thought he was done talking, and I think he had cut out. Yeah, okay. So sorry about that, Yeti. Don't mean to step all over you. The fuck, I lost it.
It's okay.
Oh, our first episode when Joe Biden. I sent you those clippings
Yeah.
that had Joe Biden has a money problem, and not only a popularity problem but a money problem. And then the next one was Joe Biden reaches out to Larry Fink of BlackRock
Right.
for some help. And then the next clip I showed you was BlackRock, its key executive roles in the White House. You know.
So I want to talk about one last thing because we are pushing time here. I want to talk about one last concept, okay? And there's people in the chat. We're not live yet. There's people in the discussion that are going to roll their eyes and look down on this point and say, "Oh God, we're going to talk about this again." Yes, we are. And I'll tell you what, I don't give a shit if you like it or not because this is a necessary talking point. All right, what I'm about to bring up is necessary to talk about, and that's this. Capitalism on its whole was always made to function with and built around the industry of slavery. It always was built around the idea of certain groups of people doing the work and not being paid for it. And when that industry came to a very calamitous end, there was no clear-cut plan on how to deal with that loss of economics. Because let's not make a mistake here. In the origins of the United States, black people were not people. They were property. They were absolutely property. Now, with that being said, there was, again, as I said, there was never a plan for how to deal with that loss of revenue. And since then, it has been a scramble to find a way to take as much money from people as possible and give them as little in return as possible. That has always been the plan and the strategy. And you look at the situations that are unfolding, people having no money, people working hard for no money, people working long hours for no money. Nobody's able to afford anything. Nobody can do anything. Nobody has anything. It's all controlled by a small group of people or a couple of corporations. That's the situation that we see ourselves in. And that is intentional because that's the new slavery. It's called wage slavery. And what wage slavery is the idea that if you keep people at a certain economic status and you make sure that they always remain at that economic status, that there is no pathway up and there is no pathway forward, then you force them into a situation where they have to keep working and keep working and keep working and keep working until they either die or luck out and find and get something to get them out of that situation. And then if that happens, they become part of your club anyway, so they're now an ally to you. Wage slavery is an idea that is designed to do two things. It's to keep people in as much poverty as possible so they're as desperate as possible, and to incentivize crime so that more people are in prisons because the prison industry is a for-profit industry. Being a prisoner is profitable now to some people in the United States. So The reason I wanted to talk about wage slavery just real quick is because I am so proud of the average everyday person right now, because maybe it did take a global pandemic or whatnot, but people are finally starting to wake up and realize, hey, I'm worth more, even as a 16-year-old high school student or a fresh out of college person. I am worth more than $7.25 an hour, especially given the current situation. I am worth more. And I thought that forever we were never going to see people actually realize their own value. But you look at what the pressure that people are putting on corporations, and that's why McDonald's is now putting up signs that they're going to hire. You see signs that say now hiring 14 and 15, and you're like, oh, dollars per hour? No, 14 and 15-year-old kids, because they don't know. You look at Burger King being forced to offer $10, $11, $12 to get people in. Restaurants all over the country are shutting down because people aren't working there because they realize they're worth more, and the unemployment benefits were a better gig for them. And I have never been prouder of the average person for sticking it to the fucking people who say, well, if you don't like it, go get a different job. Well, guess what? Some of them went and got a different job. Some of them stayed home and dealt with COVID in a quarantine. And you know what happened? All the people who said, go get a different job are like, well, wait, this job's important. And it's amazing how quickly essential workers became useless low-income jobs as soon as we pretended that COVID was over. It's amazing how that transpired and how quickly that happened. Is it shocking? No, but it's truly amazing. And I mean truly amazing.
It sure is.
So,
so much stuff we've been led to believe is just absolute hogwash, if you will.
Yeah, I like that. So, with that being said, I think we've covered quite a lot of good information here today, and I think this is as good an episode as we've ever done. So, do you guys have any final thoughts before we take off here?
And I think I pretty much got everything covered that I wanted to. Actually,
What about you?
No,
Eddie?
you were rocking today's. So yeah, I got most of my stuff covered. I didn't have a lot of stuff for this one.
Yeah, it's a little different for you up in Canada because you have maybe not totally different, but you have a significantly different enough situation up there that it doesn't completely line up. So,
and you know what?
Yeah.
Real quick. What you were just hitting on, Swerve, like you're proud of the people because we're changing the conversation, right?
Yes.
But notice who's not changing the conversation.
Mm-hmm. That's an important topic.
Like I mean, we don't hear anything from the government. I mean, all we see on the news is labor shortage, people not wanting to work, and it's like, are you going to go ahead and fill in people don't want to work for crumbs? Because that's what it is, and that's what you were hitting on, man. And yes, it is awesome that people are like, fuck that, I'm worth more. But what we will see in the next few days, that extended unemployment runs out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see any talk from the government about re-upping it. And I don't see any talk. I mean, God forbid they go ahead and let that lapse and then, say we got to at least raise the fucking minimum wage to $10. They don't even talk about that anymore, man.
Nope.
And so it's like,
Well, 15
how
was
after,
the starting point, wasn't it?
well, and it was what? It was 8 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Where the fight for 15 started.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
I mean, and I mean, inflation is through the roof right now, and people are still making, here in Illinois, you talk about McDonald's and shit like that. Like Illinois, we did pass $15 minimum wage. It doesn't come all the way into effect until 2025. But right now, I forget what minimum wage is currently. It might be 11 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you got Burger King and Arby's and all them with the signs up saying $11 an hour.
Yeah.
And McDonald's, they're in such a position to where they can offer $1 more. So on the sign, we don't have the sign here saying 14, 15-year-olds. It does pay $12 an hour to work at McDonald's, but in the state below us in Kentucky, they are still a 7.25 minimum wage state.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, God, I just feel so terrible for those people, man, because it's
my state says 7.25 too. So.
No, is it?
Yep. Pennsylvania is 100% a 7.25 minimum state.
God damn.
See, up in Canada, we have 15 across the board now, at least.
Now, I will say this, and it's not really a justification, but Pennsylvania's cost of living is fucking dirt cheap. Like, you can, unless you live in one of the,
right?
Unless you live in one of the major cities, like, let me put it to you this way, okay? And I'm going to make a lot of people sad when I say this out loud, but it's just true. I was able to buy a house last year, and I am able to pay my house, car, bills, and that includes gas, electric, water, sewer, and garbage, and still have money left over. And all of my bills combined total up to $1,200 a month.
Oh, fuck you, bro.
That's how dirt cheap it is to live in Pennsylvania. So that's why when everybody makes fun of Pennsylvania, I'm like, yeah, there's farms everywhere, but guess what? My mortgage payment's $500 a month. So fuck you.
I paid double that for my condo I bought through low-income housing program.
Yeah, and when I'm talking, like, my house isn't huge by any stretch of the imagination, but I have, like, a full kitchen and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a living room and a big yard. And, like,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that to, I'm not saying that to show off. I'm actually saying that to prove my point that because my cost of living is low, I'm able to survive on like $15 an hour. But people in New York who have like a $12,000, maybe the $1,200 rent, you know, they cannot. All right. Their rent alone is the cost of my entire bill structure. And the only reason I'm able to do what I do for a living is because of how dirt cheap cost of living is in Pennsylvania. I'm not naive to that fact. So
I live in a city that, like, the price range is like really, really off the charts.
Yeah.
So we bought our house in 2015, a 2-bedroom loft style. Like, I have an overhang, so I don't even have a full upstairs.
Yeah.
I have a basement, 1 bathroom, 1 full bathroom. We paid $550,000
Right.
for this house.
Right.
God damn.
Yeah. And it's like a wood basement built in the 1980s.
Right.
Like, it's not new either. New houses go for about $1 million up here.
Right.
So poverty line here is 100,000 though.
So you can see the point that we're making, though, that people need more money. That's what it is. That people just need more money.
Oh yeah, in Illinois,
100%.
in Illinois, it costs more to live here. So the fact that our minimum wage is $3 or $4 higher right now an hour than the national, it's all figured in. It's all relative.
Yeah.
You know, it's all factored into cost of living.
It still needs to go up though for like a large majority. But like places where you live, Spit or Swerve, then it's not as bad because you can buy affordable things still, right?
To an extent, yeah, but people still deserve, you know, just because you can live on it doesn't mean you should have to. At the same time.
100%.
So,
but it's nice when you can at least get by.
Yeah, I can function pretty cheaply, especially considering that I have a couple expensive hobbies, but I don't need too much other than that. So, with that being said, however, I think we've hit a lot of good information, and I think we've put out a pretty good episode here today. So, I want to remind everybody once again that you can get with Difficult Realities a number of different ways on Twitter. @DifficultPod is our handle. You can listen to us just about anywhere you listen to podcasts, including iHeart, Amazon, Podbean, Google, Spotify, and of course here on YouTube. Keep your eyes on the YouTube channel if you're not already, as I am getting closer and closer to having these be live, so we will be able to have comments and feedback real time, which I think is invaluable. On behalf of Spittin', and on behalf of Yeti, and on behalf of all the workers out there who have no money, and all the employers out there who rob it from everybody else, I want to say thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Difficult Realities. You all have yourselves a good night. and a good future.